is with great excitement that I greet you this evening for our community conversations with thought leaders making a difference virtual panel discussion. While February is Black History Month, which we celebrate the achievements of African Americans, we must also acknowledge the disparities facing the African diaspora, such as voting rights, housing, employment, health, and social justice, among others. We look forward to hearing these thought leaders' discussion about the inequities in our community. Now, a little about the Links Incorporated. The Links Incorporated is an international not-for-profit corporation established in 1946. The membership consists of over 16,000 professional women of color in 292 chapters located in 41 states, the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and the United Kingdom. It is one of the nation's oldest and largest volunteer service organizations of women who are committed to enriching, sustaining, and ensuring the culture and survival of African Americans and other persons of African ancestry. The Greater Miami, Florida chapter was organized in 1955 and has provided transformational programming and services in the Miami-Dade County community for more than 66 years, pursuant to our 5 facets: services to youth, the arts, international trends and services, health and human services, and national trends and services, which is featured this evening. Greater Miami, Florida chapter is proud to have among its membership the 9th national president of the Links Incorporated, Mrs. Regina Jolivet Frazier, and the 19th Southern Area Director and Chapter Establishment Chair, Mrs. Ann Turner Harriet. We are honored to come together with these thought leaders, Desmond Meade, Dr. Tamika Hobbs, Ronnie Bennett, and Jasmine Rogers as they discuss voting rights, social justice, and racial equity. We thank these thought leaders for allowing Greater Miami, Florida chapter of the Links Incorporated to share in this meaningful and necessary panel discussion. Additionally, we would like to thank several Greater Miami, Florida chapter members for their invaluable role in tonight's session. Tonight's event chair and co-chair, Mrs. Jerry Rocker, who also serves as National Trends and Services Chair, and Ms. Aletha Player, National Trends and Services Co-Chair. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you, Gail. Good evening. On behalf of the National Trends and Services facet, we are absolutely delighted to present this panel discussion on voting rights, social justice, and racial equity. We're fortunate to have with us this evening thought leaders who are at the forefront of working on dismantling the systemic racism and inequalities woven into many of our institutions. Our panel consists of Mr. Desmond Meade, President, Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, Dr. Tamika Hobbs, Founding Director, Florida Memorial University Social Justice Institute, Ms. Ronnie Bennett, Co-Founder and Executive Director, South Florida People of Color, and our moderator this evening, Ms. Jasmine Rogers, Founder and Principal Visionary, Folding Chair Consulting. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Jasmine to get this engaging discussion started. Jasmine.
Good evening, everyone. I am super excited to be here with the Links and this dynamic panel of folks that we're going to be in conversation with. I'm so grateful for this space for us to be able to talk about social justice and hopefully dive a little deep on ways that folks can be involved in this action right now. So we can jump right into the conversation. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists by reading their brief bio, beginning with Desmond Meade, who is a formerly homeless returning citizen who's overcome many obstacles to eventually become the president of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, or FRRC. He's a chair of the Floridians for Fair Democracy, a graduate of Miami-Dade College, Florida International University College of Law, a Ford Global Fellow, and a 2021 MacArthur Genius Fellow. Recognized by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2019, Desmond presently leads efforts to empower and civically re engage local communities around the state and to reshape local, state, and national criminal justice policies. His work resulted in being named Floridian and Central Floridian of the Year 2019. As president and executive director of FRRC, Desmond led the FRC to a historic victory in 2018 with a successful passage of Amendment 4, which allowed 1.4 million Floridians with past felony convictions to have their voting rights restored, which was the single largest expansion of voting rights in the United States since women's suffrage and brought an end to 150 years of a Jim Crow era law in Florida. So, welcome, Desmond. Nice to have you here. Next, we're going to go to Dr. Tamika Hobbs, who is an author, commentator, educator, facilitator, and consultant with expertise in African American history, public history, and anti racism education. She is the author of Democracy Abroad, Lynching at Home, Racial Violence in Florida, which won the 2015 Florida Book Award for Florida Nonfiction and the 2016 Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore Award from the Florida Historical Society. In 2020, Hobbs founded the Social Justice Institute at Florida Memorial University. Hobbs also serves as chair of the board of directors for the South Florida People of Color, a nonprofit organization based in Miami Shores, Florida, dedicated to eradicating racism through education and advocacy. Hobbs serves as the founding president of the South Florida branch of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Welcome, Dr. Hobbs. And last but not least, we have Ronnie Bennett, who is the co-founder and executive director of South Florida People of Color, a 501c3 nonprofit racial healing collective of thought leaders with the mission to curate and facilitate authentic conversations for healing justice as a catalyst to dismantle individual, institutional, and systemic racism through education, advocacy, and action. The vision is to plant the seeds of transformation for personal reflection, truthful storytelling, deep dialogue, and conversations on the journey towards racial healing. Ronnie enjoyed a successful career in Silicon Valley, where she held several technical and management positions at leading technology firms, including IBM, HP, and AT&T. Her expertise is in project and program management of complex technical and global programs. She brings 25 plus years of business and marketing expertise used to build strong business relationships at all organizational levels. Thank you so much for being here, Ronnie. Bios are always the tricky technical part of any panel. And it's so funny because I know you all personally, and we've worked together and been in various conversations together. But it always makes me smile so much to read people's bios, because that is our space as Black folks to brag, right? To openly brag about the work that we do. So I hope you all take a minute to just relish in hearing your bios again and feeling really good about everything that you've done for this work. So jumping right into our conversation for tonight, we're going to be talking a lot about social justice. And I would love to hear from all of you individually from the places that you do your work, because it's all very different, but still connected to a larger social justice ecosystem. In layman's terms and language that folks can understand, what does social justice mean to you? And we'll start with Desmond.
Yeah, I should have figured that one out, Jasmine. First of all, listen, huge shout out to the Links for putting this panel together. Definitely an honor to be here. You know, when I think of social justice, you know, I think of a world where human dignity is valued. I think a world where people are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their immigration status, regardless of whether or not they've ever been convicted of a felony offense, regardless of their sexual identity, regardless of the color of their skin, where we're able to connect with each other along the lines of humanity and recognize the value in treating each other with dignity and respect.
Thank you. I love that. Dignity regardless. Dr. Hobbs.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Good to be with you all again. I want to thank the Greater Miami chapter of the Links for the invitation and for the ongoing support of the Social Justice Institute. They were sponsors for our conference back in October, and so it's glad to be with them again. For me, social justice as a historian really is just the latest iteration of a very long struggle for racial inclusion in our society. But I think what's different for me is the ability to have conversations about equity. It's been different than what we've seen in the past, where it's really, especially for African Americans, been about access, especially for women, for other all these other groups. But now we can really have a deeper analysis. It's not just enough to open the door; it's about resource sharing and realizing that for people who have not been at the table for hundreds of years, that it often is stacked against them, and that there has to be some type of corrective action in order to make it work better. And so I think that that's one of the things that occurs to me. For the Social Justice Institute, we have 8 areas of focus that we define, that we use to define our work, and they range from educational justice, economic justice, environmental justice. We know we need to look at gun violence is a systemic issue, but also gun laws that are pervasive and allow guns to exist in our society. But undergirding it all, we know we have to have an understanding of systemic racism, because if you can't define the problem appropriately, your strategy will be flawed from the beginning.
I love that. The equity and corrective action. Okay, Ronnie, what does social justice mean?
Yeah, I think they took most of what I would have said. But to me, it is equal access. If you don't have access, to wealth, health, well-being, even privileges and opportunity, then you don't have social justice. So it's access, it's equity, it's participation, and it's rights. Those are, I think, the principles of social justice. There's probably in some definition, some, you know, with those things. So yeah. But the key is equal access.
I love that. Well, Ronnie, sticking with you, in an article in the Miami Herald recently, you said everyone can work to end racism. Everyone has a role. So when we talk about access and dignity, equity, corrective action, what is our role in beginning or continuing that work?
Yeah. I get that asked all the time, Jasmine. So I think the first thing when we talk about everybody has a role, one of the roles is to educate yourself or educate ourselves so you can understand your own biases, because we all have them, right? So you have to work on yourself first. And then once you know better, you actually do better, you know? So what we, it's just everyday things you can do. And people think some folks think it's hard, especially with their own family members. But, once you educate yourself, and this is a lifelong journey, this is not like, you take a course and boom, you get an anti-racist expert. But this is a life journey. And what we do is we have like some tips for you, right? So you should respond to every bias or stereotype or microaggression in the moment at the time. There's like little things that people say. So you need to, and we have a little tip card where you can either interrupt that, where you speak up against it. Someone may say something, biased. I'm going to be nice. I don't want to get sued. I don't want to get sued. And, and you would just say, hey, that phrase is hurtful. Or, you'll question people. Like if they'll say something, you'll just say, what do you mean by that? And to have people pause and think about the stuff that they say, it goes a long way. So that's some of the things. And then, you can donate and join South Florida People.
Well, we'll get to that part later in the program where everybody can send their links and talk about their work. But I love that idea of take action, right? And part of the action starts with us internally. And then part of the action is about just acknowledging like, oh, that didn't feel right,
Exactly.
And addressing it in the moment. And that is, for some things, that's a simple thing that we can do, right? And especially the learning and the reading is something that we can control to educate ourselves. So, Dr. Hobbs, being a scholar of history, you've learned a lot about not only Florida, but you also talk a lot about nationally social justice related to politics at the intersection of race. So, do you believe that white supremacists and other extremists are a serious and immediate threat to our democracy right now?
Yes, I mean, I will say that with authority. The institution that I work for, Florida Memorial University, was one of about 30 HBCUs that recently experienced bomb threats in our nation, and so we continue to operate under this cloud of this threat of racial violence. A bit about the history of Florida Memorial University. In our 143 years, we've actually relocated twice because of racial violence that's been targeted against our campus. First, the first time in 1892, which facilitated a relocation from Live Oak to Jacksonville. And then in 1968, in the months after the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and a cross being burned on the lawn as a threat of the campus there, it actually precipitated our relocation to South Florida. And so it is real. I'm actually really excited that the Social Justice Institute has been selected by the Southern Poverty Law Center as one of their partners to lead a landscape analysis of the threats against against justice in the state of Florida. And we're going to be embarking on that with Florida International University. And so we'll actually have an opportunity to lead some of the research that will create an analysis of what's on the landscape for us right now. And that's really a part of our intention to create research that can be of meaningful as we address these questions. I think what is less talked about and much more serious is not the physical violence, but the policy violence that we see continuing to be enacted against all sorts of people at the margin. I'm thinking now of what we're seeing in the Florida House with House Bill 7 and Senate Bill 148. That are going to ultimately have the impact of stifling the teaching of Black history in K-12 and college environments. It's going to stifle the work that we undertake with the South Florida people of color in terms of trying to bring this type of training into corporations and school districts. The Don't Say Gay bill, the anti-abortion bill, you name it. There are just so many deliberate and insidious legislative actions that are being pushed. I take that language of policy violence actually from Carol Anderson, another historian, and her book White Rage, because she really traces this push against Black advancement from the time of emancipation. And while in that most immediate period, it did look like physical violence, what we have seen moving forward and still are grappling with now is policy violence. But we have the antidote to that as citizens. If we mobilize and organize and educate ourselves as voting blocks, we can do a tremendous amount of work. And there's a lot of work left to be done. And Desmond has actually showed us the way. I count him as a source of continued inspiration. For those who doubt, for those who are apathetic, you got to understand Desmond and the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition and their historic work here in the state of Florida.
I think that's a perfect segue for us to kind of stick in on policy. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley says policy is my love language. I love that very much because it's very much mine. I'm a student of policy and combine that with history, and we have a template for everything that's coming in the future. So Desmond, we read in your bio that when we talk about policy violence, FRC was able to kind of put a pin in one lane of policy violence for formerly incarcerated people. So can you talk to us a little bit about why that win was so necessary and what we see happening now since the passage of Amendment 4 that is still creating barriers for formerly incarcerated people? And then I'd also love to hear you talk about how that ties back to white supremacy.
Oh, Jesus. I'm gonna see if I can put it all together in one neat package. When you talk about that win being necessary, it definitely was because it created it created an opportunity for people with felony convictions in Florida to be able to participate in our democracy, and it ended a 150-year-old Jim Crow law that Florida had in place since Reconstruction era. here's the thing that while I do give credit, the win is important and was necessary. I think the process was also very necessary because when we tie this in to why we've seen felon disenfranchisement in the first place in our country, all right, understanding that it was one of many tools that was used to suppress or to diminish the newfound political capital of our brothers and sisters who was freed from slavery. We dig deep into that and understand the mindset of the folks that was doing that. Um, you get to understand that, as you talk about you being a student of policy, is that a lot of times what drives that policy is a narrative, right? And it is a narrative that's based on some type of experience or some type of perception. And in this case, there was a real, distinct fear, right, of the impact that African Americans could have had on this country's politics and policies, because soon after the Emancipation Proclamation, what we seen was our brothers and sisters getting elected into office. They was actually exercising this newfound right of citizenship in this country, and it was very terrifying to former slave owners. And so, along with poll taxes, along with state sanctioned violence, that was primarily led by what has now evolved into the modern day police, right? Along with literacy tests, was felon disenfranchisement and went hand in hand with convict leasing. And so, all of the things that we see occur during the Reconstruction era is actually happening right now, right? It's just with a different wool over the wolf, right? That is really a wolf like in sheep's clothing. But all of that is driven by this narrative, right? That manages to dehumanize us, right? And while dehumanizing us, desensitizing people as to our humanity, right? And I talk about often of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where the United States, before they were able to murder all these innocent women, children, and men, they had to engage in a propaganda campaign that depicted the Japanese as dangerous people. And therefore, when they did drop the bomb, rather than people being outraged, right, of the murder of all these people, they were actually celebrating in the streets, right? And that's that same type of narrative that has been driving a lot of the social injustices, and primarily speaking in the area that I'm an expert in, driving mass incarceration and these tough on crime laws. And here's the deal: when you see cases where there's a police officer that murdered someone, one of the very first things that come out is, oh, well, that person had a record, as if having a record justifies the inhumane treatment of someone, right? Or you see here in Florida, there are laws that says that even if you was wrongly convicted, right, even if there was prosecutor misconduct, right, and you should have never been convicted, you would not get a penny in compensation if you had a write-up while you were incarcerated, right? And so you see these policies that really are driven by the fact that, yeah, people are painting us as dangerous. They're painting us as not as intelligent, as violent people, as super predators. And because of that, these policies are made to be in place for quite some time. And so, what was special about the Amendment 4 effort was that we were able to transcend our campaign above the politics, right, that drives a lot of these inhumane policies. And we were even able, for a brief moment, to transcend the implicit racial biases, right? that's associated with it. Because when you talk about crime, you close your eyes and you think about it. The image that come to your mind, right, is not a white person. It's a black person. Probably a black person with dreads and sagging pants, right? Because that's the image that has been ingrained in people's mind due to this narrative. And so the reality is that felon disenfranchisement at the time that we launched Amendment 4 impacted more than just African Americans. And so we was able to take advantage of that fact and create a narrative that was all encompassing and turned this into an all-American issue, a human dignity, human rights issue. And we were able to have, or at least portray people with felony convictions as human beings, as someone worth a loving, of
Right.
someone that's worth forgiveness.
Right.
And
I love the talk about the narrative, and I think that Dr. Hobbs would agree. Through history, like that's important, right? That not only we're carrying those stories forward, but we're using stories in our political fights. And Dr. Hobbs, you just mentioned like the Stop Woke Act. We have abortion bans. We have all of these bills that are moving in Tallahassee right now. And for those that don't know, the Stop Woke Act is one of the governor's priorities, because he feels that white people are being made to be too uncomfortable in conversations about race. I would even argue that because of the language of the bill, they're also saying men are too uncomfortable in conversations about patriarchy, because it very explicitly says race, class, sexual identity. Like, you are not allowed to teach in a way that would make anybody feel uncomfortable at all, or they're being encouraged to sue. Both in public schools, private schools, but also private institutions. Mm-hmm. So Ronnie, the work that you all do, right? You are going into not only schools, but also private corporations to have these conversations about race. Let's talk about how important this policy is, how disruptive it will be to your work with South Florida people of color.
Yeah. We like to call it the white fragility bill. So yeah, it's unconstitutional, really, but the narrative is out there, right? I mean, they're putting the narrative out there. So even I'm sure eventually it has to be, or maybe we're, in a fascist, maybe democracy is dying or something. But I really feel that it will. But the narrative is out there. It's scaring people to not do anything, or to cancel stuff, or to just go business as usual. So this will impact us, but it's more important than us, right? It's trying to wipe out a large segment of American history, which Black history is American history. I like to say American history is Black history, but anyway, and also a variety of people that is just going to erase, it's so interesting with this bill, because it doesn't want you to talk about systemic racism, but that's what they're doing. It is systemic racism. So the thing is, what we're trying to do is, we're partnering with a lot of organizations to try to get the word out, to educate people. Our main thing is education, right? Because if people don't know, they don't know. And this is not just about race and implicit bias, and it's about sexual harassment. It's about don't say gay. What is it? Is it called the don't
That's the informal title of it, that you are not allowed to mention things like that in conversations.
It's crazy, right? So so on our team, Dr. Hobb is one of the ones that's like really, pushing this. So, I want to kick it over to her to talk a little bit more about it.
Thank you, Ronnie. And through Ronnie's leadership with the South Florida people of color, we've really been able to touch and impact thousands of people. And we've been in confronting this present crisis, trying to energize that mailing list and call on our allies to get involved and to raise their voices. The other thing we talk about in our presentations is it's not just good enough to be on the sidelines and say that I'm not biased, I'm not actively committing any type of oppression against anyone. You have to be an active anti-racist. You have to be using whatever tools or resources or influence at your disposal in service towards making things better. And so this is one of those occasions where we need to translate all of that energy that was on the street back in 2020 into some political activism. And so we've really been trying to push on the front there. I just want to maybe just add another layer to this. I think it's so ironic coming from the academy and just kind of my own interest in my research and my work and what I've seen with so many others, these kind of activist scholars, that what you see in this anti-critical race theory push is now that we have decoded the DNA of white supremacy and oppression in this country, you have people using that same white supremacist, power to silence scholars. I mean, and when you look at these bills that are being proposed and adopted across over 30 states in the union, they are specifically naming Ibram Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, Nicole Hannah-Jones, and there's an automatic assumption because they are scholars of color or writing about issues of anti-racism that their work is somehow invalid. And so the power to do that, the power not only to really wreck someone's career and trash somebody's research, but then to turn around and silence any discussion about it, is an example of critical race theory predicting how racist acts. And so what I read is on the other side, so very often what we see is an equal and opposite reaction to where the energy is. And that is my entire read, that people are really threatened by the racial reckoning that has been taking place. And it predates what we saw in 2020. I think as a historian, the energy that was invested into finally telling the truth about the Confederacy and trying to remove those markers from the landscape. It's all kind of a reaction against that. And so it's incumbent upon us to raise our voices, to tune in. I think far too few people are aware and are paying attention to how all of this is playing out.
And I think that's a great point. I mean, it was a few years ago that I learned that all of these conversations that are happening in the Capitol about these bills are public, right? You can watch them when they're happening through the Florida channel. So I know I watch religiously to the committee hearings, and that is enough to send you in a rage to hear the types of things that they are saying about our people, about the people that we love, about what kids should be learning or not learning. We just saw Abbott in Texas and that horrific instruction that he just gave about trans children. If you are a trans child that is receiving any type of gender affirming medical care, your parents can be reported to their state Department of Children and Families to be investigated for child abuse. He is ordering them to do that. If you know of a trans child that is either on medication for hormones or has undergone any surgery, that is considered child abuse, and your child, depending on the severity of what they determine abuse, could be removed from you, right? So that equal and opposite reaction that you just mentioned, Dr. Hobbs, I think is so poignant and so relevant. And more people need to be outraged, knowing that these bills will pass because of the way the math works, especially in Florida, right? And in the South, these bills will pass. And how can we fight back? Ronnie, I wanna go to you first because a lot of your work at South Florida People of Color also is about engaging white people in this work, right? In a way that causes discomfort because that's how we learn and grow, right?
Absolutely.
But what is their specific responsibility, and how do you find them reacting to these talks of social justice and racial reckoning and critical race theory?
Yeah, so our people are always learning, right? We're all learning, and it's not just white people, it's kind of all of us that needs to be educated on a lot of this stuff, right? So I just don't want to point out the white folks because I think all of us needs work. The thing is that we have these discussions, and I think that's what helps. We talk about it. It is uncomfortable. It's it is uncomfortable, and but I think that's how you grow, right? So it's uncomfortable conversations, and but we talk about it, and and we educate ourselves about it. And so the call to action is to do something, and they're doing their part. Uh, you know, uh, Social media, uh, talking to their family and members, and so it's pretty, the same old thing. And you're going to hear me say the same old thing. It's like it's authentic conversations, talking about this stuff, and just kind of being in community with these folks. So, and it's everyone.
I hear that. I hear that. And I mean, speaking about everyone, right? When we talk about policy, and Desmond, I'm coming to you. When we talk about policy, I mentioned voting, and folks have talked about it as a necessary evil, right? Like voting doesn't take away all of our issues as Black people, as women, as queer people, as formerly incarcerated folks. Like it does not take away all of our issues, but it's a tool in our toolbox that we have to exercise, that we have to use along with other things. So, State Representative Ramon Alexander recently said if half of Black registered Democratic voters and half of all other Democrats voted, Florida could be flipped from red to blue.
Mm.
And we see that in the numbers in Tallahassee right now, right? If we had a little bit more parity, a little bit more equity in the party lines in Florida, I think we'd be having very, very different conversations and prioritizing very, very different things. So, Desmond, we all have a responsibility in civic engagement, like for those of us that can vote. How what do we do about August, right? Like how do we continue to find hope after this horrific legislative session? How do we, what are we doing?
I'll tell you one thing. I don't think we find what we're looking for by flipping red to blue. All right. I'll be totally honest with you. When we talk about, even the history of my people were hung, beaten, and burned by Dixie Democrats.
Mm.
Right. And make no mistake about it, racism is just as pervasive in the Democrats as they are in Republicans. All right. And make no mistake about it that you have folks on both sides of the aisle that really do not care about us, right? As blacks. Let's make no mistake about it. However, I do believe that voting is an essential tool, right? Not to flip from red to blue, right? But to flip from wrong to right, right? And to flip from death to life, right? And I say that because, I remember in 2010 that Rick Scott ran for office against Nan Rich, I believe. I think her name was Nan Rich. And he won by around 63,000 votes, right? That year there was 808,000 African Americans who was registered to vote that didn't vote, 912,000 registered Latino Americans that was registered to vote that didn't vote. So you had over 1.7 million people of color who did not bother to even mail in a ballot in an election that was decided by only 63,000 votes. Rick Scott went on in that year. Remember, he tried to insinuate that our African-American lawmakers were all from the ghetto and came up in single-family homes. And the only people on welfare was black folks, and that they were using that to get drugs. And I mean, he was just going in on everybody. And the thinking at the time, and it was my thinking, wow, this guy is going to galvanize the community so much he's going to be a one-term governor. And 4 years later, he runs for re-election. This time he runs against Charlie Crist. And guess what? Not only did he win again, but he had more black people vote for him the second time around than the first time around. And he won by 63,000 votes. But this time, the number of African Americans who were registered to vote that didn't vote increased to over 1.3 million. And the number of Latino Americans increased over 1.1 million. So now you had 2.4 million people of color who didn't vote in an election decided by 63,000 votes. And I'm willing to tell you that when we talk about the last gubernatorial election that was lost by 30,000 votes, I'm willing to bet you that there are over 10 times the amount of African Americans and Latino Americans that was registered to vote that didn't even bother to mail in a ballot, right? Right. And it's not, like I said, and we have to drive our people, right? I think not around turning blue or red into blue, but the things that I said before, and hold people accountable on both sides of the aisle. And we have to demonstrate that we're willing to do so. And I think the minute that we are, right, because even when I looked at the rise of the Tea Party, which kind of led to this extremism, was that the Tea Party at its infant stage was willing to eat their own, right? They were willing to sacrifice their own people, right? To get their point across that no, it's what we want. And now you have people tripping over themselves, trying to out radicalize or out, conservative, just more crazy than the next person. I'm even at a loss of words. I think the key is, how are we showing up in local elections? We talk about the killing of our young people, the jailing of our people. We can elect in the state of Florida. Every trial court judge is elected. Do you think we show up in those elections? No, right? Every state attorney is elected, and almost every sheriff is elected, right? And so we have within our hands the necessary tools and the resources to actually put our people in office, or put people who care about the humanity in each other in office. And in doing so, right, we're able to not only change policies, but we're able to change bad actors, right? Because you can't have one and leave the other, because they're gonna get contaminated. We have that power to do so.
I think that I want to stay here for a second, because I think that that's a really important topic. I have a lot of compassion for folks that are apathetic about voting, right? As a former candidate, as someone who votes, like, I have compassion because I understand that our voting system in and of itself is white supremacist. So it's made for folks to not understand. It's made to be overwhelming. It's made to feel like you cannot be a part of the process. I'll never forget a couple years ago when it was time for the constitutional review in Florida. Broward had one of the longest ballots in the state. It was 10 pages long. And I remember being in the voting booth, and there was a Black woman that was there trying to ask the poll worker for help, because she was like, I don't understand what this is. And the poll worker was like, I can't tell you, right? Like, I can't tell you. So I went over and I helped her. But that to me was a lesson, because here's this person that clearly wants to understand, right? She wants to make a decision, an informed decision. And for whatever reason, she didn't come to any one of our, amendment forums. Like, maybe she had more things to do that were more important or whatever. We can't reach everybody, but it's like, how many folks do we have out here that will vote for a president on a ballot because it's the top, and those are the commercials that you see the most? But when you get down to a sheriff, when you get down to a school board member, when you get down to local, they're like, I just literally do not know these people, and this is too much, and I'm just in here rushing to vote. So, like, I also believe that Black folks are more connected to the reality of our people in politics, whether we're from academia, we're making laws in the Capitol. These are our moms, our brothers, our sisters, our siblings, that we know and are more intimately connected to the realities of their situations. How do we talk to our folks about voting in a way that connects it to, you don't like that you got arrested last week? There's a person for that. You don't like that your trash is getting picked up on a Wednesday? There's a person for that. You don't like that you still got student loans? There's a person for that. Like, how are we making that more real as a part of our social justice? So, and that's for all of you all. So go ahead, Desmond. You can start.
I'm glad you asked that question, because there's a couple of things that's running through my mind, right? And as it's running through my mind, let me make sure I put a pin in one thing, right? There in Broward County, not too long ago, was a race for Congress to replace Alcee Hastings, right? If I'm not mistaken, that race was decided by 5 votes.
Yes,
5 votes. Right?
5 votes after 13 Democrats ran.
There you go. So, well, that's another topic there, right? Because that goes to some of our problems, right? And because here's the thing, right? Even when I've gone through my process of healing, through recovery, when I have gone through the process of Amendment 4, and I led it from basically start to finish. One thing that has been consistent, that's always been in the back of my mind, is that the majority of our problems can be solved from within as in without, right? And so many times we look at those folks that are our enemy, and sometimes I believe we need to rethink who the enemy really is, right? Because the majority of our heartache and the majority of the obstacles are actually erected by people who are on our side or supposed to be on our side, right? So how do we fix that from within? Because that right there, that congressional race in itself tells me that we had the power to make a change and make a difference.
Right.
We have one of my members that ran for office. He won his race. He's now a councilman in the city of Inkville. He won by one vote, right? And that one person that voted was his cousin, who never had the right to vote, but through Amendment 4, he got the right to vote and he was able to vote, right? And so I think that when we have conversations with folks, right, I think it's less driven about this savior, right, which is typically a white savior or whatever that's at the top of the ticket, and it's more should be more focused on local politics, right, and the people that will be not a savior, ready for this, but rather a public servant, right? We don't need any saviors. We need servants, people who will serve the will of the people, right? And you know what? Sometimes they may not look like us, right? Sometimes they could. We've heard the saying, just because you my skin tone, that don't mean you my kinfolks. However that goes, right? But at the end of the day, I believe we need to have more conversations about how getting involved in this democratic process empowers us to choose the people who serve us, right? And it starts at the very local level. And I believe in trickle up voting. If I can get people to come out because they're excited about who the next dog catcher is going to be, right? Who the next tax collector going to be. If I get parents excited to come out because they're concerned about who the next school board member is going to be, then I know those people are going to vote the entire ticket. But if I'm trying to rally people like in 2020 around a president that had some serious issues with our people, especially with the 94 crime bill that he didn't think he had to address because he got our vote. It's in the bag, right? We've heard that said even by Senator Nelson. You know,
Right.
I'm not worried about winning against Marco Rubio or whoever, Rick Scott, because those people that's coming out and voting for Amendment 4 is going to be voting for me. Assuming that they naturally have our votes so they don't have to work for it, they don't have to serve for it. When we address or ignore those folks and address the people at the bottom of the ticket, it works itself out on the top of the ticket.
I just want to jump in there because what the question you're asking really speaks to something that's been squarely in our focus at the Social Justice Institute. One of those 8 areas of focus that I referenced is civic engagement, and we really doubled down on that this academic year on our campus. It started first with you, Jasmine, bringing you in, and I'm so grateful that you agreed to be our second advocate in residence on campus to really uplift civic engagement and decode leadership and voting for our students. That was manifested in our conference, Building a Different World, Reimagining the Future, inviting down Insay Ufat with the New Georgia Project to talk about what they did in Georgia, having her in conversation with you, Desmond. Just was an amazing part of the vision. We kicked right off after that with support from the UNCF and the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition with our Ready, Set, Vote HBCU Florida bus tour, and went around to all these campuses. Desmond kept me plenty busy. And we were able to have real impact by enlisting campus ambassadors, getting students to sign pledges that they would vote, do what they needed to do, whether it was to update their voter registration or apply for their absentee ballot, to educate themselves and educate their family members about what this could mean for them. And so for me, that's the work. And that's what makes what we do with the Social Justice Institute on a historically Black campus so very important, because if we can can inspire those students to understand these issues, they become leaders in their families and communities, and it broadens the reach, it broadens the understanding. And I think that really can be transformative for our communities.
I love that. Can you talk very briefly, Dr. Hobbs, about what you're seeing with young people? And I mentioned that question because you sat in on a class where we were talking about power and is there male privilege, and it was just fascinating to hear the things they were saying.
Yeah, fascinating, painful also sometimes in looking at their framework. But again, another reason I'm grateful for you and your presence on our campus to be able to, deepen the conversation. You're approachable, you're gentle, but you also, confront them and challenge their thinking so that they can become better critical thinkers. I also have seen you in action, grooming our young leaders, preparing for the conference. And what I've seen in our last meeting with the Student Association, when I look around the room, we were able to translate this idea of power and talk about the types of things that they're interested in. Like right now, the Republicans are proposing legislation that would add metrics to about $2,000 worth of funds that students receive called ease funds. And those metrics would have a devastating effect on the ability of students who elect to attend HBCUs like ours or small private schools. For them, they wouldn't be able to receive those funds. And so they get that when we talk about forgiveness of college loans, they get that. And so getting them to formulate what they think about. Our president of the organization, Janaya, got a chance to go up. Shout out to the Florida Student Power Network, and they're digging in with our students. They were able to travel up to Tallahassee. Janaya got on the mic and talked about the impact of HB1 and just gave this really forceful defense of the teaching of Black history. And so it's just been beautiful to watch how they bloom, how they blossom, how they've been able to grow. And it's all been, part of the synergy that we've seen with the Social Justice Institute on our campus. So that's the work that brings me the most pleasure. We got interns going to Gordon Week's office.
Yeah.
Jasmine got them in with Senator Servin Jones's office. They got donations coming in to support their work. And so you've just been such an engine, Jasmine. I just want to thank you for what you've brought to the campus.
Young folks teach me a lot. They are a headache, and they're again, I think that if we spend enough time with our people, we learn how to interact with our people and beyond, right? So young folks have taught me how we can interact with other young folks and what are the things that matter to them. And we need to tailor our messaging, tailor our conversations to those things, because it's not about us, right? It's about them that are going to be the most impacted by these policies. So before we go to Q&A, how would you encourage others to take action? And there's going to be space in a little bit where you can shout out the links for your organization, but what would be a brief, first step or first 2 steps that folks can do to make a difference where they are right now?
Desmond talked about it earlier, and that was not waiting on the Messiah. I agree with you, Desmond, and sometimes that Messiah, it may be a white politician. I think people are still waiting for the second incarnation of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King to come back and come save us. That is a very problematic construction when it comes to people saving themselves. The most important thing that you can do is to orient yourself and get active yourself, and then you will attract people who are activated in the same way that you are. And before you know it, you have built something that is powerful and can really do work. I've seen that in the work of the South Florida people of color, frankly. It continues to amaze me. And so I've seen it and I know it to be true.
Thank you. Ronnie and then Desmond.
Okay. Well, I would say attend some of the South Florida people of color events. Because our stuff is, we like even now, and we'll talk about it later, I guess, it's about, experiential education. It's the dialogue, it's storytelling, it's self-reflection, and then you build those connections with people, right? You build with like-minded people. So I think come to our events, and then you will be motivated. And you are the one that will save you. You are the one.
I love it. And Desmond.
Hey, Jasmine, I know that, listen, that if you have to, you'll get out there on the dance floor and dance by yourself, right? Right. But what you prefer is to have a group with you and
Exactly.
have a good time, right? We're not going, nobody going to go see Beyonce or Rick Ross by themselves. They're going to bring their family and friends, and wait, we gonna click up and we're going to go and enjoy ourselves. Well, I think the immediate specific action that people can take right now is that I promise you that there are 5 people in your network, right? Whether they're family, whether they're friends, whether they're neighbors, whether they're classmates, there are at least 5 people in your network who are either registered to vote or eligible to register to vote that don't participate in elections. And what you can do right now is to make a pledge. Don't treat it like the New Year's pledge, right? That we forget after a month. We'll make a serious pledge that if you and challenge yourself that if you are on this show right now, if you're watching us right now, right, and you believe that you have some type of compassion for our community and for the state of affairs, what's happening in the state of Florida, and you believe that a change needs to happen, then are you courageous enough to find 5 people, right, to take with you to the polls the next election? And if you're able to do it the first time, the second time you're going to bring 10 with you.
Right.
And before you know it, guess what? If one of y'all bring 5 people, you could have changed that election in Broward County, right? So, hey, just one. Listen, the power of one.
Crazy.
Right.
The power
Right.
of one, right? And so I think that that's the immediate first step. And then I would encourage folks. Listen, great organizations, my fellow panelists in South Florida, got it going on. I can tell you that right now. And I love me some Professor Hobbs and the Social Justice Institute. Invest in our future by investing in our kids, and we can invest in our kids by investing in the Social Justice Institute at Florida Memorial University.
I love that. Right. We accept. I love that. And we'll have, again, an opportunity to drop the links and the websites in a few minutes. So we're going to shift into our audience Q&A. The questions are going to pop up on the screen, facilitated by the links. So we're going to ask folks to submit their questions in the comment section where you're watching on Facebook or other platforms, and we'll have them on the screen. So the first question we have is, lots of businesses and business leaders made bold pledges and statements after George Floyd was murdered in 2020. Why are they silent now about the Stop Woke Act? And should we be calling them out for their silence on this pending legislation?
I will just say I have been surprised by how little opposition I have heard organizing about these bills. And I think they're not being called out because we're not calling them out. And I think we're not calling them out because far too few of us are aware. As I said, with South Florida People of Color, we've been working to ring the bell. I know Carrie Feet with Women's March is another one. There's so many issues, though. That's the other thing. And we did have a meeting to try to kind of lay out some strategy. That the activists are worn out by all of the challenges, and this is just happens to be one I think that hasn't risen to the top. But as a historian, I know how important having accurate knowledge about our past informs the future. That has been my role with South Florida People of Color. Surprising to me, I really wanted to teach Black history in an HBCU environment, but once I got out, what I realized is far too few people, regardless of their background, really had spent the time to dive in. And so our book talks and film talks have become a way for us to move that forward. It's personal for me. I was a young person that did not get enough exposure to Black history. And it was at Fort A&M when I took my first Black history class. It absolutely revolutionized my understanding of my parents and grandparents. It revolutionized my understanding of my place in the world. And literally the rest was history. It changed my major. And so I think people don't appreciate how the decisions that are made about K-20 curriculum echo out for generations. What we decide to include And in this case, what we decide to exclude is really going to have a problem. But it's incumbent upon us, though, not necessarily to be reactive, but proactive. You mentioned in my biography that I had the privilege of serving as the founding president of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, founded back in the 1920s by Carter G. Woodson. It's the reason why we have Black History Month. But he was motivated because he also understood during that period that there wasn't enough information. And so we had to do it for ourselves. I think we're back in another do for self moment, Kuji Chagalia from our Kwanzaa principles, self-determination. And so, yes, we do need to call upon those people who made all those promises, but we also need to be about the business of making sure our children get what they need.
Yeah, and I think for me also part of it is like, how are we calling out with depth, right? Our demands have to have depth. If the demand is simply, you must say Black Lives Matter, they'll do that and move on, right? If the demand has to be more than that, and it makes me also think about the Montgomery bus boycott. Like, I also don't think that economics is the only way to shift these things, but I think it is a huge way. These organizations respond to money. And the money coming in, the money coming out, people of influence saying, we are not going there if you don't do X, Y, Z. So I think that that's important. Anybody else want to lean in on that question?
Just a couple of things. Mama said that the best way to get a man's attention is to touch his pockets. But I also know that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And I challenge folks, that we could even revise our question, right? And instead of why are they not, folks not calling out these businesses, it should be what can I do to raise awareness? Because see, let me tell you, I'm nobody special, right? And sometimes we tend to rely on our so-called Black leaders to initiate things or lead things. And the reality is each and every one of us have what it takes inside of us to make a change. Jasmine said, I was homeless. I was a crack addict. I was incarcerated. I was suicidal. That's where I came from. So if I can come from those depths, right, and be influential person in the world, lead a ballot initiative, restore voting rights to 1.4 million, then anyone looking at this presentation right now have everything that you need inside of you to do that and even more, right? And so we don't have to relinquish the greatness in us, all right, to rely on the greatness in someone else. Let's tap into that greatness within us. And if more of us do that, the laborers then become bountiful, right? And guess what? We're able to knock out a lot of this stuff that we know we can knock out, that we need to knock out.
Amen, Reverend Me.
Right.
That's my name for you.
If you call me Reverend Me one more time, I'm gonna start passing the basket. Start collecting tithes and offerings.
Okay, Ronnie, this question is for you. Diversity looks a lot different in South Florida. What measures should be taken to make sure Black folks are fully included, especially in diversity hiring? And I think that this goes back to the previous question also, like how can we be ensured that these companies are following through deeply on their commitments?
Yeah. Well, we know South Florida is very diverse, but it is very segregated. And it's different here because folks don't seem to understand the difference between ethnicity and race. There's a lot of people of color here that identify as white, right? So we have these different cultures, and it just seems to be very specific to South Florida. I mean, I'll have folks from New York, they'll be Latinx folks, and they're like, look, I'm white. I didn't know I was white, right? So it's really focused on here. I feel like I'm like saying the same thing over and over again, but these organizations, again, it's the same as a person. You have to, you need that organization, education, and training, and it has to be transformational. It shouldn't be like regular, like just slides and things like that. It needs to be, again, experiential. It needs to be customized. It needs to be transformational. And And, so one of the things that, that we tend to do to make it effective is that we spend less effort on coddling and centering whiteness, because that's the problem. It's like, don't say this, don't say that, So we don't do that. So we make sure we don't center whiteness. It's not about them. We put more energy in uncovering, the needs of systemically, I like to say systemically excluded groups instead of underrepresented groups, because it's, it's happening to them. In order to, understand and to support systems that promote hiring and safety and well-being. We need to focus on the folks that's being marginalized, right? So we curate and we customize according to the customer, and then we have spaces where, even though we'll talk about diversity, inclusion, and all those great topics, the key is for sustainable change, right? And to have real deep inclusivity. It's deeper, it's more personal, it's more of a deep dive. Because, someone has said, and I don't know who this person that said this, they said something like, you cannot transform institutions or systems in practice unless you are transform yourself. So people need to be transformed first, and the culture needs to change. And that's where you'll be able to make that, it's not performative, it's real change. So, nothing's going to happen unless, you change the minds of these folks. So
if I could just to piggyback on that, because I've been involved with serving some of our clients who have invited us in, and it's been interesting the type of analysis we've been able to provide them when they think that they're being diverse and they have the words on paper, but then we really challenge them to look at their practice, to look at their demographics. As Ronnie pointed out, diversity looks different in South Florida. You can't lift up Hispanic people as a part of a population, Latinx people, and say that you are achieving it, because many of those same people are going to identify as white. And so, one particular group that I'm thinking of, going in and looking at the people that they served, but that would happen to be primarily people of color, and then looking at their administration and recognizing that there was not the same representation there, and asking hard questions about why that is, asking questions and bringing perspective to what it's like to be one of the few administrators of African ancestry when you have such a large population that you're serving that are people of African ancestry, and the undue burden that puts on those folks, how isolating it is, how servicing the emotional needs of people of African descent that look like them can stymie their careers. So what are you doing systemically to really make sure that you can retain these professionals, hire more of them, and make sure that it's reflective of your body, because that is real equity. And so we've been able to, we've provided that opportunity to come in, and it's most powerful when we have leadership who agrees to do it.
Exactly.
For the entire organization, starting with them, starting with the executive, and then bleeding down. And those are the models that we prefer, that Ronnie really shops out. And then we try not to be transactional in the work that we take on either.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. The appetite has to be there. Thank you for that. The commitment and the appetite has to be there.
Absolutely.
Okay. Do we have any other questions from the chat? Let's see if they pop up on the screen. Okay. All right. So I think that this is probably a perfect segue into all of our closing remarks. Ronnie, can you share a bit more about your work, particularly the 360 Community Race Dialogue Forum and the Awkward Dinners concept? And from Ronnie, we'll go to Desmond and then Tamika with giving your closing remarks and how people can get a hold of you and your work. Go ahead, Ronnie.
Okay. All right. So, so the Unity 360 Community Race Dialogue. So, we started in 2015. I'm not going to bore you guys. In 2015, now but we were founded on the need for equitable political representation in the small town of Miami Shores, right? So our vision was to draw people together across the racial, ethnic, and cultural divide because of South Florida, right? So what we did was we decided to offer community dialogues and cultural events. But in 2016, it was interesting because that's where I met Dr. Tamika Hawes. We invited her to do a book reading on Between the World and Me. And so in 2016, that's when the Unity 360 Community Race Dialogue became a thing, right? And that was because we had a lot of mature white folks who loved it and wanted to continue to talk about race and identity. So it's been going ever since. And what it is it's a facilitated public forum where we pair readings and film and current events, and and we also include in food and drinks and the arts. So it's very experiential, and a lot of talking. So that's the thing. It started then, and we've been doing that, like I said, since 2016. And I would say the results of that, having those conversations in Miami Shores. So in 2019, we were able to, as a result of bringing everybody together and having those conversations, we were able to have our first Black mayor, Black woman mayor in 2019, out of 87 years, right? And then in 2021, we got our second Black female mayor as a result. And then we had our first Black Haitian on the council. We got Black Jamaicans as the village manager for the first time and I would say now in 89 years, right? And then also an assistant vice village manager. So those are the metrics, right? Those are results of having those community conversations. So hopefully that helps. And then, the awkward dinners, because we were having so many people coming to the Unity 360 Community Race Dialogue, we wanted something more intimate. And you guys all, well, Desmond, you haven't been to one, but you're gonna have to go to this. But Jasmine and actually, I think in a way, should I give that credit to you, Dr. Hobbs? Were you the one that thought of this? Okay, so all right, but anyway, she did, and that's one of our most popular programs. Is I don't know if it's the food and the alcohol, but we really get a lot of deep dialogue, and people are transformed, they say, after that. And now that's part of our DEI curriculum that we have with organizations. We start there, especially with the leadership team, and then then we cascade down. So does that answer your question, or should I?
Yeah. So I think there's another part that is, how can people get information? So we need that information. But then I hear a partnership blooming with Desmond and FRRC that there could be an awkward dinner about incarceration.
Exactly.
Listen, as long as you're not only offering vegetarian dishes, I'm there, right?
Yeah, we'll do vegetarian.
Eat my meat. So.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
You're vegetarian now?
Listen, wings. Hey, I can deal with.
No, he said he needs his meat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm a meat eater.
Definitely not.
Yes,
I'm definitely not vegetarian.
Okay. I was like, no.
So Ronnie, before we shift to Desmond for this question, what is the website where folks can get more information?
Yeah, absolutely. It's southfloridapoc.org. Yeah.
Okay, I love it. southfloridapoc.org.
Yeah, just check that out and just give me a call.
Okay, perfect. All right, Desmond, are you concerned about ongoing voter suppression and gerrymandering of congressional districts that could dilute the power of Black and Brown voters for decades to come? And then shout out your org and how people can get involved and give you money.
Yeah, of course. And so, yes, I am concerned. But make no mistake about it, this is nothing new, right? From the very inception of this country, we've always had a group of politicians that wanted to select who get the vote for them rather than letting the people select them. I mean, listen, it wasn't too long ago that women didn't even have the right to vote. And listen, they got beat down by men, they got jailed, right, to prevent them from even trying to gain that right to vote. And so what I know is across the board, listen, don't get too caught up in the hype and look at the bigger picture. Understand that gerrymandering, right? This gerrymandering and the drawing of these congressional districts, is a tool that politicians on both sides have used since the beginning of time, right, to pick and choose who they vote, who their voters are,
Yeah.
right? And so what I see is, and what I'm most concerned is about the deterioration of what we expect a democracy to be, right? And all of these are tools that are used to just erode this democracy away. And now we're seeing things like we're seeing I'm here in Florida. But but even in spite of that, I still have hope, right? Because I see the work that's being done by grassroots organizations throughout the state of Florida, and the work that my organization is doing around felon disenfranchisement, around criminal justice reform, around putting people in office, right, who actually give a darn about us, right? I think Ms. Bennett just named off a few first in the city of Miami Shores, right?
Mhm.
That don't happen unless people are engaged. But what's most important, and I'm talking directly to the Links community, because you all are each powerhouses, right? That we have to be or play a very important role in shifting the narrative. And it starts within us, right? And the narrative that we have to, one of the narratives that we have to fully embrace, right? And I think Andrew Gillum used to say it a lot during his campaign: a rising tide lifts all boats, right? And this, I didn't make it up for you all, but I've said this before. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, right? No matter how much you may want to bear, that chain to bear, it could only carry as much weight as the weakest link could handle. That same is true to our communities. If we truly want greater communities, if we truly want a better state, it is imperative that we focus on strengthening the groups of people that has been most weakened by systems of oppression, systems of racism, and that narrative that says that some lives are less valuable than others. Do not fool yourself into thinking if we make the link stronger, we could change things. If we get more folks into the links, we could change things. Oh no, all contraire. We have to go get Pookie and Ray Ray, the Shaniqua, right? And we have to get people that we may not, well, we may be uncomfortable engaging with. But those are the very same people that's going to play an intricate role in our liberation. If you're a person of faith, you can always see throughout the Bible that God always uses those who are least among us to bring about the biggest change. Just like
Absolutely.
science.
Oh, wow.
Let us focus on empowering that. And you can do so. Hit me up on my Twitter at Desmond Mead. Go to our website at Florida RRC.com, FloridaRRC.com. Listen, you could donate to our fines and fees fund because no one should have to be forced to choose between putting food on their table or voting. And you could donate money there. You could donate some of your time. But listen, if you're in the South Florida area, I would defer your energy and your human capital to my fellow panelists, right? Because I know that when they're getting that work done, it benefits everybody because they're just an extension of the broader work that we're doing throughout our communities to empower our communities and change conditions.
I love that. Thank you so much. Don't you also have a book, Desmond?
Funny you should mention that. Yes, I do. And it's a great book that I would encourage people to get. It's Let My People Vote. And it talks about my life story as well as some inside information about the campaign to restore voting rights in 1.4 million. And so I would encourage folks to get it. I think Jasmine, Jasmine would tell you it's a top 10 book. And I think Dr. Hobb would
I
definitely.
read it. I read it. It was great. Yes.
Well, y'all need to hype my book, not me.
Put it on my shelf back here. So we have
That's what's up. But no, I encourage people to get that. If nothing else, just to know that, you know, I remember at one point looking down on crackheads and looking down on homeless people and people who are committing crime and thinking, see, that's the reason why black folks can't get nowhere, right? Oh, that's the reason why this is messed up. That's the reason, right? And what I understand now, because I end up becoming those people, right? Those people is that at the end of the day, right? They're someone's son, daughters, sister, brother, mother, father, right? They're still a human being that's worthy of being treated with dignity and respect. And if we can shift our thinking and find ways to love the least among us, my God, that opens up the door for us to love everyone, in spite of their race, in spite of their sexual identity, in spite of their immigration status. It doesn't matter, right? If we could learn to love and humanize the one group of folks that's been most despised in our community.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
Dr. Hobbs, can you give us the benediction? And I would love for you to include in your benediction a view of the future. Because you study so much history, I feel like you can predict for us where we're going. And then also tell us how we can stay in contact with you.
Appreciate it. And that's how we know Desmond is not a real pastor, because a real pastor wouldn't be diffusing the donations. That's why I rock with you. I thank you for that shout out. I do want to echo that your book is fantastic. I've been associated with you for a few years. I've seen you, do what you've done tonight. I thought I knew you until I read that book. And not only was it just a really deep dive into your journey, it was incredibly inspirational. I have a whole new appreciation for you. I didn't think I could like you anymore, but I do. And I think everybody should read your book for sure, because it definitely does highlight the leader that exists in all of us, should we listen to that call in our lives. So in terms of what I see on the future, what I've been talking about for a while now is the fact that in our nation, we are in the midst of what I like to call a third Reconstruction. The first Reconstruction historically was what happened after the end of the Civil War, the end of chattel slavery here, and the beginning of incorporation of people who were formerly enslaved into the body politic here in the United States. That revolution fell short. It meant that a century later, we had to come back with our second Reconstruction, commonly known as the Civil Rights Movement, and try to get it right all over again. Just like in the first case, we have some very important gains. I think about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a number of successes that took place there, but we have become a lot more stagnant. The forces that would like to push back against that advancement are mobilizing actively. I was greatly encouraged by what I saw in that historic mobilization across this nation and globally back in 2020 after the tragic murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. We have a choice before us now as a society as to what we're going to be moving forward. Are we going to go back to this system that some people are really holding on to? Or are we going to continue to really fulfill the promise of us becoming a more perfect union? And I think that is a question that each of us has to answer for ourselves, and not in a passive way, but in an active way. What are you going to do? And since 2012, 10 years ago, and the murder of Trayvon Martin, being the mother of African-American boys, being the person who writes about the murder of African-American men, my work has been within my HBCU to use the tools and resources I have, to use my intellect in service of making sure that there are no more Trayvons. That has manifested in our Social Justice Institute. So I would encourage people to support your HBCUs, support the one that exists in South Florida. Florida Memorial University needs your support. There's some fantastic things happening there. And be more specifically, we welcome your support for the Social Justice Institute. Being able to hire our next advocate in residence to have that high touch with our students, student internships, experiential learning, bringing in guest speakers, putting on our conferences. All of those are made possible by donations like the ones that the Greater Miami chapter of the Links have made in us. And so I want to thank them and acknowledge them again for the investments that they have already made. But if people want to do more with us, they can reach us at our website, which is socialjustice.fmuniv.edu. So socialjustice.f as in Florida, M as in Memorial, UNIV as in university.edu.
You also have a book.
Yes. Democracy Abroad, Lynching at Home, published by the University Press of Florida. If anyone's interested in obtaining a copy, they can visit my website, which is tamikabradleyhobbs.com.
I love it. Again, we started with shouting all our accomplishments from the rooftops. We got to end with that and making sure people can reach us to give us the coins. I'm also Jasmine. You can find me on all of the social media, Jasmine Rogers, and also at foldingchairconsulting.org. This has been an incredible conversation. I have loved sharing space with you all. I think that what I would close with is saying the things that I took away is dignity regardless, right? Of who we are, who we love, where we've come from, what we've experienced. We all deserve and are worthy of dignity regardless. This conversation about equity and corrective action for the things that have happened in the past, and how are we creating access for the people around us? And to me, that culminates in something I say all the time, that revolution starts at the kitchen table. People feel like for them to take action, they must be in the streets, they must donate millions of dollars, they must do all these things. But like Desmond mentioned, how are you talking to the 5 people closest to you? Over Thanksgiving dinner, over your next gathering at your house, when someone says the thing that you know is inappropriate, how are you correcting that? Or how are you calling folks into a conversation about politics where they normally wouldn't be talking about it? How are we making sure people feel empowered to take control over their lives, whether it's through social justice, at the ballot box, in conversations, at work? How are we creating those spaces where we can build dignity for other people regardless? So thank you again to the Greater Miami chapter of the Links for hosting us on this panel discussion. I look forward to being in this work and continuing to build with you all. And I will turn it back over to Jerry. Is Jerry? I think it's Jerry that's coming. Or Aletha is coming. Aletha Prayer. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Jasmine. What more can I say? What a wonderful experience we've had tonight. The information that was passed on from our panelist and also our moderator. Please join me with a round of applause for just 1 second. Before we leave, I want to remind you that each panelist has given us a call to action. It's been said we could raise our voices. We can make a pledge to take at least 5 people to the polls during the next election. I would encourage you to get engaged, volunteer to register new voters, participate in these community forums, and stay informed. Again, thanks to our panelists, Desmond Meade, Dr. Tamika Hobbs, Ms. Ronnie Bennett, and our dynamic moderator, Jasmine Rogers. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this ends our webinar. Good night.